Nos emociona presentar al equipo de Adaptive Designer Association. Tamara Morgan es la coordinadora de Asociación Comunitaria y usuaria de elementos adaptativos. Trabajó en el centro artístico Dream Yard, donde se brindaban terapias a jóvenes y sus familias con el fin de promover la salud socioemocional a través del arte. Fue anfitriona de Disabilities Redefined, donde incidió para reconstruir la idea de capacitismo. Graduada de la NYU Stringhart School of Art Therapy. Nació con osteogénesis imperfecta, lo que provoca que sus huesos sean muy frágiles. Sin embargo, es una mujer optimista, usuaria de tecnología adaptativa y fiel creyente que el trabajo en comunidad hará un mundo mejor. Eric Gottshall es diseñador y fabricante adaptativo. Recién graduado del programa MFA de Diseño en la Escuela de Arte y Diseño Mason Bros. Le interesa la investigación constante en la autonomía del individuo y dentro de sus espacios. Desde 2021 trabaja en Adaptive Design. Por último, Adam Sawaf es diseñador adaptativo senior y fabricante en Adaptive Design. Su experiencia en diseño industrial, fotografía y arte, principalmente escultura, influye en sus proyectos laborales. Entusiasta de los nuevos desafíos y creyente de la evolución constante en la creación para mejorar la calidad de vida de los usuarios y las personas. Bienvenidos al webinar Una Introducción a Soluciones Centradas en la Persona y el Desarrollo de Comunidades.
Hi everyone, I'm Tamara Morgan, the Community Partnerships Coordinator here at Adaptive Design. Thank you so much for inviting us to this special day. We're super happy to be presenting our workshop. I'm here with my colleagues, Eric Gottshall and Adam Sawaf, and we'll take it away.
Yeah, thanks everyone for having us. We're excited to be presenting to you, even though it's a little bit remote. Hopefully we have a chance to connect with anyone who's interested in maybe learning more or partnering in the future. But really today we want to give you a good background on what it is that we do at Adaptive Design, give you a sense of a few of the projects we've done in the past, and then walk you through a simple hands-on activity that revolves around the tangible symbol cues, which we'll talk about in just a bit. So I'll go ahead and pull up our slide deck here. We're going to start off with a brief kind of video tour just to set some context within our space and give you a sense of where it is that we work. So let me pull this back up, share this. Looks like I might need screen sharing. Thank you. Okay. Let's do this again. Just give me 1 second. All right, here we go. All right. So just to give you a brief overview of Adaptive Design, we're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Midtown Manhattan, New York City. And we've been an organization for the last 23 years or so. And for the past 18, we've been in our current location here. So we started off very small. We still are a very small organization today. We're about 7 full-time and part-time staff members, but we rely heavily on volunteers and interns for supporting a lot of the work that we do. So we build things here, but a large part of our mission and ethos as an organization is to teach folks the process as much as possible. So we want to really put all the information that we can out there. Anything that we build, anything that's new and innovative on our end is just another item that we can hopefully get out to the masses or to as many people as possible so that they can also better serve their own communities. So we recognize that being a small organization, we can only meet the needs of so many people. And certainly nationally and globally, especially, there's a massive need that exists that we can't possibly meet on our own. So it's really important for us to teach the process rather than just build and keep things to ourselves.
We'll talk about this more as we get into it, but we exist in a world of cardboard here at ADA for a multiplicity of reasons, but one of them being that many people have access to cardboard. It's also a very demystifying material when it comes to creating durable medical equipment. And it's a great thing to work with as a maker.
Yeah. So you'll notice as we go through the tour, there's going to be a lot of cardboard visible. We go through quite a bit of it, and we'll talk more about the specifications and kind of what makes it special as we get to it. But really, a lot of the tools and processes that we use are not so unfamiliar if you've been in a making space or a carpentry shop before. But as we come through our front door here, honestly, a lot of the space has actually since been revamped. We're in a process of kind of updating things and refining things, but our front space, as soon as you come in, is where we keep most of our sample adaptations. So these are things that we've built as samples or that have come back as past adaptations once a child has outgrown them. So you'll notice a lot of the things that you're seeing here are actually cardboard. Some have been painted and finished, others are a little bit more raw. And a few of these things you'll see in slides coming up later on.
We also kind of live the world that we preach, and so many of the desks and working spaces were also made out of cardboard throughout the office.
Yeah. And so this space here is mostly a classroom space. So typically we'll have students come in to learn the process. We have a lot of that process outlined on the wall as a visual aid. And, you know, this is a secondary working space aside from the workshop where we can host groups. We have several of the staff kind of displayed here on the elevator, but there's also a lot of volunteers shown there as well. So you can see just kind of how small we are as an organization. That's pretty much everyone and then some as far as who's here. And then as we continue through the space, what we're gonna see first before we move up into the workshop is the rest of our downstairs space towards the back. So you'll see a bunch of photos of past adaptations along the wall, along the stairwell. We'll talk about several of these in just a little bit. But before we touch on those, towards the back of the space, you'll see where we produce our tangible symbol cues, which is what we're going to focus on with our hands-on activity today. So those are 4-inch by 6-inch cards. So we actually have one here. So this one signifies gym, but we make a set of cards that's 25 different cues sold through American Printing House for the Blind. And each card has a different object embedded in it. It has a label with text and braille as well. So the idea is these serve as an early communication aid for children with visual impairments or who otherwise need an augmentative communication system. So this is very low cost. It's very accessible compared to a completely computerized system. And for very young children, it's just a much more appropriate way for them to begin learning simple associations between objects and a specific activity.
The beauty of the system too is its complexity and kind of adaptive nature can grow with the individual as their ability to communicate becomes more nuanced. And so we use things like Veltex backboards like you see here, which is just a fabric that interfaces with hook side Velcro, and you can stick the cards in different sequence to create phrases or sentences or, you know, whole thoughts. But it really is a beautiful kind of versatile way to augment early communication.
Yeah, and a lot of the cues you had seen just now as the video was panning across are part of the standard set, but also a lot of them are custom cues as well. So if there's a specific activity or item that somebody wants represented, we'll work with them directly to come up with a custom cue that signifies that item or activity.
Yep.
So you're not limited to the standard set. We encourage folks to create their own or come to us if you don't have the resources to do it yourself. But you know, it's something that you can expand on in a DIY capacity rather than being locked into a more complex system. So this is our shop. It has been quite a bit decluttered since this
Completely redone.
since this video, but you'll see a lot of those cue cards in various stages of progression on the tables there towards the left-hand side of the frame. So you can see larger boards with tons of cards ready to be cut out and then stacks of pre-cut cards. This is where we used to keep most of our hand tools and clamps. You'll notice it's all pretty common workshop tools. We don't use anything super proprietary. And really a lot of what we use can be pared down to even more basic hand tools. So we have the power tools and larger machines just because of the volume that we produce you know, within a year, but it can be pared down to really basic hand tools, and you don't need the power tools.
A lot of the stuff we do here is in-house. So when we're doing work with soldering or when we're doing work with switch adapting, we have soldering irons. We have all of the equipment needed to create the switches that we then adapt into toys. So you can see some of those components here. We have 2 3D printers that we work with as well, so we can actually print the housing that goes around the switches. This room also has been completely redone, but we still have quite a few of the electronics that you see in here, which are just, you know, really basic, simple switches, servos, wire, pieces of copper, trying to demystify the process of switch adapting as much as possible.
Mhm. And then as we kind of come out of this room here, you'll also see a space where we can make belts and padding and any soft items that might go with an adaptation, or sometimes they're the adaptation themselves. The adaptations can be large and complex, or they can be really simple, and sometimes just having the right type of cushion or padding is the difference between something almost working and working close to perfect. So anytime we can do a part of the process in-house, we like to do that. So the sewing area gives us that capability. You also notice in that previous room, we had a lot of the bins made out of that same cardboard. So it's the tri-wall cardboard that we use for the base of a lot of the adaptations we make. So this is a piece of it here, which we also use for the cards. So it holds 1,100 pounds per square inch and a crush test rating. So this is what would normally be used for shipping produce or large appliances, things like that. But we've kind of repurposed it into great material for creating adaptations. And it's very forgiving, much more forgiving than working with plywood or plastic. So for new learners or folks trying to learn the process, this is a great place to start. And it can really go on to serve people from all ages. So we'll give you some examples of what we've done in the past with it. We start off with examples of cardboard and mostly cardboard adaptations, and then we'll run towards some more complex adaptations that incorporate other materials for various reasons. So the first one we have here was built for Cheyenne. So Cheyenne has dwarfism, and you can see her using her existing classroom chair in the left-hand photo. And while she physically fits in it, it doesn't quite fit her, right? So you can see she's really far from the table with her seat touching the back of the chair. Her legs aren't able to bend over the front of the seat and touch the floor. And it's just not an optimal seating position. So for a lot of us who are able-bodied, it's something that we for advantage is, your ability to kind of sit wherever and for the most part be comfortable. But for someone with a different body, it can be a little bit more complex of a challenge. But by building a chair that's tailored specifically to Cheyenne's body, we can accommodate a lot of those differences and make sure that her space really isn't so different from everyone else's. So you can see the chair that we built there on the right-hand side is, I think, almost completely cardboard. We might have had a piece of plywood on the base, but it's probably 95% cardboard. And that's, of course, been finished. So we do a process called edging, which is what we'll be working on later with you all. So we essentially cover the edge of the corrugation to seal it, and that creates a nice surface for us to then paint and seal the cardboard so it's a little bit more durable.
One of the awesome things that working in this material allows us to is to focus on the environment that the adaptation is going to live in and make the adaptation accommodate not only to the individual, but also to the environment. So in this case, instead of, they wanted there to be a portable way essentially to get the chair and Cheyenne out into the playground so that she didn't expend all of her energy before she got there. She could use that energy to play. So that rather than creating a separate structure entirely to move her body out into the playground, we created a system where you could just take the chair that she was already sitting in and already forming a physical personal relationship with and put it in kind of a dolly with a handle and move her out into the playground. And then she has her chair, she has something that's familiar to her that she can take a rest in, and then she can go out and play. This is a system that cuts way down on the physical footprint of what otherwise would need to be a chair and perhaps a wheelchair, which would need to be stored somewhere. And, the aides or whomever was working with her would need to be in charge of that.
And ordered, right? Because wheelchairs generally, at least here in the States, will take a minimum of 6 months to receive. And by that time, Cheyenne may grow a little bit more and may have different needs. And so we're able to make the adaptation at the right time for her.
Yeah. So everything you're going to see for the most part, we try to keep the time frame from start to finish within a month. So some of the more complex adaptations, like you'll see at the end of this presentation, can go a little bit beyond that, but it's usually a fraction, like a quarter of the time it would take to get something through insurance or a catalog. And also significantly less on the cost front as well. So everything we make is at no cost to an individual's family. So if it's something that's built for them at home, they're not obligated to pay for any or all of it. It's kind of a pay-as-you-can model. And then for schools and other clinical facilities like hospitals, we'll invoice and bill separately. But it's not, we don't want cost to be a limiting factor for families getting what they need.
Yeah. Also, something indicative of the paint job here is the fact that we work hand in hand with the clients while we're creating. This is famously overlooked when you're trying to get equipment through insurance. You'll wait a year or two, the equipment arrives, and then it doesn't work. You know, never mind how it looks. In this case, we are in constant communication with the individual, with practitioners working with that individual, with caregivers. Othered as possible. We want this person to feel absolutely included in the environment that they're spending their days in.
Right. And it's also something that helps break down the stigma among other students. So rather than it being this kind of weird, strange looking chair, it's just a cool rainbow unicorn chair that everyone else wants. So it changes the conversation and perception about adaptive devices in an inclusive space. So the next example here was a seat insert for a slightly older student. He uses this folded plywood seat, which is actually pretty slick. It's a nice design, but it doesn't offer a lot of support. So you can see there's no armrests, and the way that the seat is angled, he kind of slides back in the seat. It was just a little difficult for him to support himself all day sitting in this position. But because he uses different classrooms throughout the day, rather than making one chair that would have to then be transported between each class, we decided that an insert was a little bit more appropriate. It could be placed on any seat in any classroom, so it gave him a little bit more agency on, you know, where he sits each day. He can kind of just put it wherever he'd like to sit. And because it's cardboard, again, it's very lightweight, aiding to the portability of the entire thing. So it just slots right on top of the chair. There's nothing needed to secure it. It just fits and sits on top of there. It's got the lateral support he needs. It's got armrests, and then you can see on the right-hand photo, there's some yoga mat that's been repurposed as padding. So it prevents him from slipping, and it's a little bit softer on the seat as well.
For every completely custom thing we make here, I would say we complete another project that involves a pre-existing piece of furniture or positioning equipment that's just not quite meeting standards and the needs of the individual. So a big thing with adaptive design is actually adapting pre-existing equipment so that it does meet those standards. Sometimes that's as simple as making a foot plate that fits underneath the chair, or like you see here, we make an insert. We've gotten much more complicated. But it's a really interesting design process, not to negate the good that's already been created, kind of out in the ethos of furniture and equipment that we can then take and tweak it so that it works just right.
Right. And a lot of the adaptations we do, you know, sometimes the thing that we're adapting is 90% of the way there, and it's just, you know, that last 10% that makes a crucial difference with how effectively that thing can be used. So no adaptation is too big or too small. We try to meet everyone where they're at, and if it seems like something we can feasibly do, we'll do it. And you'll see some more unique examples as we kind of go through these slides. So our next example is a lab seat set up for a high school student. She also had dwarfism, and you can see that the lab seats are of course designed for typically sized high school students. So it's quite tall for her. She had quite a step up to get into the chair, but she was able to manage using the bars on the seat. But you can see that she has really no support on her back at all, because she has to be all the way up to actually reach her work surface. And even then, the work surface is just a little bit too high for her. So you can see how high her elbows are there.
I'll actually say too that unless your shins are 4 feet tall, this chair is uncomfortable for anybody.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's not the most ideal seat, especially if you're trying to work at a surface. It's kind of tipped back and concave so that you want to kind of lean back and slouch in it. Yeah. But in order to kind of get it, you know, working the way it's supposed to, we created an insert that just really fills the space between her body and the seat, and really just moves her up right where she needs to be. So you can see in this instance, we went for a slightly more subdued paint job, so it kind of blends in, and then the entire adaptation itself is removable. So when other students are using the space, it's easy to take off the seat and stow in the cubbies under the desk, so it's out of the way. It just uses a couple straps to secure it around the back, around the bottom of the seat. And then for her footrest, rather than creating kind of a big step up to get into the seat, it's a slide out wooden platform that's on drawer slides. And then when she's not using it, it slides back in and becomes another shelf on the desk. So again, it's, you know, not really intrusive when she doesn't need it. It's just kind of there in the space. And when she needs it, it slides right out. The seat itself is all cardboard, and then it has padding on the back and on the seat as well. The back padding is a little bit thicker just to account for some asymmetry that she had on her back, but it's contoured to fit her just right. So the next chair we'll show you is one that we made for Isaiah that has almost every feature we've ever put into a chair in one chair. So it's again, mostly cardboard, but it does include quite a few more materials. So we also incorporated plywood here, acrylic, there's some metal hinges. So really everything that we use, there's plastic that's been heat molded. Everything we use is on this chair, but the whole idea was to give him a surface and space that was supportive of various different activities. So you can see he loved to read with his mom, but he was getting a little bit tall and big for her to hold him and manipulate the book at the same time. And they just wanted a space for him to be able to do that more independently, as well as other various activities. So this particular tray had an insert in it that you can see under his hands that articulates up into a reading easel, but it was clear so that it doesn't block his line of sight. He can still see what's around him and have his books propped up, and he can reach the pages to turn the pages. The tray and the insert are removable, and then the entire thing reclines so that when he's being fed, he uses an abdominal insert for feeding. So he needs to be at a specific angle for that, and that's something that we work with his parents and therapists to identify those, you know, clinical specifications to make sure that we're doing it all correctly. We have backgrounds in design. We're not clinicians, so we want to make sure that we're getting accurate information from the folks that know the individuals we're working with better than we do, just to get as close as possible.
One of the biggest challenges when creating something with so much adjustment and versatility is not creating the actual adjustment and versatility, but making all of the different shifts that the adaptation can make intuitive for the caregiver, the practitioner working with the child. So in this case, like the pin that's held to use, the pin that's used to hold the chair up at a certain position, you know, when it's either upright or reclining is big and visible. And then there's like big indexing holes, you know, rather than creating something that's more tucked away and hidden. There are, you know, tons of really great adaptive chairs out there already that have a million different methods for adjustment. And what we find when we go to hospitals and schools that utilize this equipment, despite all of the adjustability, none of the adaptations are actually fit to the kid or the individual. And that's partially because, you know, the caregivers are never trained on the equipment, but also because there's so much adjustability that it becomes overwhelming and you don't quite know where to start. And so one of the big things that we consider before we do anything with a complicated piece of equipment like this is understanding how it's going to live outside of our walls and how intuitive that maneuverability is really going to be.
Yeah.
And just commercially, if Isaiah wants to get a semi-comparable piece commercially, it would not be able to meet all of his unique nuances of needs. It's just, it's really just not possible. And so the really person-centered piece of our work makes it possible for him to get the best fit for him.
Yeah. And again, you know, similar to what Eric was mentioning before, you know, especially in New York City apartments, space is tight. And as children get older and they need bigger adaptations, the less you have to store, the better. So if we can pack multiple functions into one adaptation, it just makes it that much more functional and space saving, not only for the individual, but for the caregivers and those who are, you know, helping them out use this adaptation.
With early intervention patients in particular, we try and build a lot of growth into the adaptation too, which goes back into that space saving. If you can have one adaptation stick with that child for 3 or 4 years versus 3 or 4 different adaptations that are going to meet the child's needs over that time.
Right.
It's going to be easier for everybody.
And early introduction, just in case you might have to know, are for children from the age of 4 to 3 years
Yes.
old.
Mhm. So next we have a floor setter that we made for Benny and I'm not sorry, Lucas. This is not Benny. We work with a lot of different kids. So for Lucas, we made a floor sitter that reclines in space. So the idea was his therapist wanted a way for him to sit upright more independently, but also access toys on the floor and, you know, just play at a more kid-friendly level rather than being elevated away from his siblings or friends, you know, just to get on that correct level. So this brings him much closer down to the floor, but still gives him the support he needs to sit on his own. So he has an adjustable headrest, there's lateral supports and cushions, and then he has a padded belt that holds him around his trunk to make sure that he's stable. And then you can see the whole thing reclines on its base so that gravity can essentially just help him out with supporting his own body. Over time, they can reduce that angle, or on days where he's got a little bit more strength, they can just have him totally upright, but the reclining function gives them a little bit of versatility in how it's used. So we have a quick video that kind of illustrates kind of how he would use it in a therapeutic setting. And we also built a tray so that as he was kind of getting used to it and developing his strength a little bit more, it brought his work surface up a little bit closer to him. So in this case, it's more play than work, but it is still a therapy goal, and he's practicing, you know, fine motor skills with picking things up, placing them in a bowl, and, you know, it just brings his work area closer to him. And eventually they'll be able to remove the tray and, you know, he can reach things on the floor, but still be supported. Mm-hmm. So now we're going to move towards projects that incorporate a little bit more other materials and techniques rather than just the cardboard. But this is a great example of how you can kind of combine those two approaches. So really relatively simple cardboard construction with a more complex kind of technical DIY project. So Shira, who's the intern you're seeing on the right-hand photo there, was with us for an entire summer and did an amazing job of learning how to code and do simple electronics. Actually not so simple in the end. She was able to do some pretty complex things with this setup. But essentially what this was we called it a music box, but it's a device that enables a group of elementary school students to practice fine motor skills while having the sort of reward and play aspect of music. So each of the things that you see the student interacting with on the left are different daily activities that they might come in contact with. So a doorknob, there's a light switch, different door locks, a latch for a bathroom stall, things like that. And each one of those is hooked up to a micro switch. So it's wired to the box that you see in the right-hand photo, that gray rectangle. And inside that is a Raspberry Pi, which is a programmable computer board. It's relatively simple if you know what you're doing. Again, Shira was the person who kind of spearheaded figuring all of that out. But essentially it works like a mini jukebox or like an MP3 player. So it has tons of songs stored on it, and you can plug in the switches to that box, and each switch correlates to a different genre of music. And it can all be configured depending on the student's preferences and which switches they're able to reach. So not only can you switch the plugs around, you can also remove those switch tiles and reconfigure them into a different order. So it's very versatile. It worked for a wide variety of students. There's a great proof of concept of how you can kind of combine a therapeutic activity with play to make it seem more like a game and a little bit more engaging than just like, here, squeeze this clip, you know, 600 times. So made the kids excited to use it. It was a fun activity for them, and it was fun for us to kind of figure out. It was a totally different challenge for us. We had never quite done anything quite like this in the past.
Yeah, I think this is a great example too of melding cardboard with different materials that meet the physical purposes of the problem at hand. So correct me if I'm wrong, but like the plates in the front that contain like the doorknob and the different little interactive elements can slide out, right?
Exactly, yeah.
And you know, if you were to do that with cardboard over and over and over again, you would start to bash up the edges, and then it might start degrading. But using things like wood, plywood, masonite,
Mhm.
Luan, these things that have harder edges when there's lots of like movement and interaction happening, can be the better route to go.
Yeah. And the cardboard and, the vast, the larger parts of the construction help keep weight down. So even though this is kind of a big assembly, it's not ultra heavy. So if teachers or classroom aides are moving it around to different students, it's not, 40, 50 pounds. It weighs maybe 6, 7 pounds.
Mhm.
So it's quite light still. So our next project here is one of our Go Baby Go cars. So these are adapted cars that were originally started at, was it Boston University? Was Go Baby Go?
University of Delaware.
University of Delaware. Yeah. So they kind of coined the Go Baby Go terminology, but essentially it's something that various organizations, including ourselves, are doing. And we take ride-on cars, switch adapt them for children who maybe can't access the foot pedal and need a little bit more support to make the car as safe as it can be for them. So for Archie, we did a totally custom seat that attaches in place of the original seat. It's got much more substantial padding and bolstering and additional straps so that he's held securely in place. And then you can see the big yellow button on the steering wheel there, so that he can activate the movement of the car by hand rather than relying on the foot pedal. So for him, we also have a quick video. A lot of it is him just being, a super photogenic kid and smiling. And Tamara is actually off camera there, so he was more concerned with hamming it up with Tamara for a little bit. But you can see him rocking, trying to figure out how to get the car to move. Mom's in the background there. She has a remote that can kind of override any functions just for safety. If he starts getting into something he shouldn't be, she can steer the car out of the way, or stop it remotely. But you'll see here in a second, he finds that button and gets the car moving. And for a lot of kids, this is their first time experiencing any form of independent mobility. So when they're too young for a wheelchair or haven't gotten a wheelchair yet, this is a great way for them to experience mobility and, again, make it a more fun, playful experience rather than purely clinical.
Yeah, many times it's a waiting game of years before one can acquire a wheelchair. And so like Adam said, this is the first instance of feeling ownership over your own mobility, decisions on where you want to go, where you want to take your body. And you get to do it in an adapted Jeep, which is just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah, these things are so much more complex than even when we were kids. I think mine, you had to like practically push it or went like a mile an hour.
Yeah.
These have headlights, they've got a radio, they've got all kinds of cool stuff.
We've started doing projects with smaller bumper cars as well, just talking about the footprint of New York City and the lack of space. A Go Baby Go Jeep is a hard thing to accommodate a small New York City apartment, but they make joystick control bumper cars now that can spin in place. And it's the same concept, but just with a much tighter,
smaller
footprint. And again, it's a way for these kids within their home to feel independently mobile before a wheelchair is possible. The wheelchair may even be too big for the home. So this really is one of the only options for non-ambulatory clients inside their home.
I think so. Some OTs that we have worked with have been able to use the ride-on car as a justification for a child receiving a power chair. So they can navigate this appropriately and safely within their home. They can advocate for the child that needs to having a power chair. Archie might be a little still too young for the power chair, but in the future.
But he'll be ready when he can get one.
Yeah.
He knows how to work it already. So next project is another one that was completely out of left field for us. We had never done anything before this or actually since, but it is something that we've been approached about several times. So it seems like in the future we will be making more of these potentially. But this was a baby carrier that we made for a couple expecting their first child. And as you can see, the dad uses a power assisted manual wheelchair, and they really didn't want to rely on a stroller in front of the chair to maneuver the baby around, especially within the home. It would have just not been feasible. It's too cumbersome. You can't really control it well. And it would be hard to maneuver the chair and the stroller at the same time. So they wanted a way to be able to support the baby on the wheelchair and give dad the ability to still move around and tend to the baby as if they were in a stroller. So we made an aluminum frame that has kind of a stroller style sling. So all the orange and yellow fabric that you're seeing, it's basically like the inside of a stroller. It has the straps that you need to keep the baby in place and the appropriate padding. And then the entire frame can be locked in place using the brackets that you see on the right. So the base bracket stays attached to the chair, and then the frame just slots in and uses those blue locking clamps to kind of lock everything down in place. So it's super lightweight because of the aluminum construction. So the dad can maneuver it on his own, doesn't have to rely on someone else to, set it up or take it down for him. And then when he's taking care of the baby around the house, doesn't have to worry about, space to maneuver, since it's the same footprint as his wheelchair would be without the device.
Mm-hmm.
So the last project we have here is a folding wheelchair tray that we made for Gabrielle. And Gabrielle uses a power wheelchair, but had previously been in a car accident and suffered a spinal cord injury. So she was a little bit newer to using a power wheelchair and was still adjusting to some of the frustrations that came with, adapting to that way of life. One of the things that she was particularly having issues with was seating at restaurants or just out in public spaces. She found that a lot of times she couldn't get close enough to a table or a work surface to use it effectively. So in order to kind of combat that, she wanted a way to have that work surface always live on the chair. So in a lot of the past adaptations we've shown you, you've seen removable trays, so they slide onto the armrest of the existing adaptation or an existing chair. In this case, we had to do something that made the tray kind of deployable, so it's always in one position secured to the chair, and then it can be unfolded to be an actual usable surface. And it was really crucial that it didn't stick out past the sides of the chair and add any width. Again, New York City is packed to the gills, so especially when you're trying to navigate streets or subways, passageways can be really narrow. So anything that makes the chair bigger than necessary probably wouldn't be used, which kind of defeats the purpose of having something on the chair. Again, the video makes it a little bit more clear on how this all works, but the tray was basically hinged in the middle and then had a uniquely designed bracket that attaches it to the bottom for armrest. And then just by pulling up on a loop, she could basically totally unfold the tray and it would kind of just fall into place rather than having to, use a large device and get it set up properly or, have to latch things in place. This just kind of folds out, sits where it needs to be. Then she has a working surface. The windows were a specific request that she had so that she could see where her feet are as she's maneuvering with the tray in place to make sure she wasn't bumping into anything. And then again, to put it away, it's as simple as kind of reversing that same process. So you pull up on the loop, move it over, and then the hinges just kind of do the rest. And there's a couple of Velcro tabs to kind of secure it in place. And you'll also notice it doesn't stick out any further than her feet and knees. So again, keeps that footprint really, really small.
So a lot of power chairs or manual chairs that you guys may come across and notice that they are being used with the tray. They're generally really heavy and not really accessible for the person that's using it themselves. So they can't take it on and off. Like it has to be assisted by someone else and really takes away the independence of the individual. So generally, I know when I was offered a tray, I declined having it for that reason. I didn't want to have to be dependent on someone, and also sort of being cased in my wheelchair. I didn't want to have that be an issue for me either. So this adaptation for Gabriella blew my mind. I remember when you made this. Yeah.
And this is another one that ideally down the line, we'd love to be able to refine more and make it possibly available to more users. A lot of times we find that once we create an adaptation, it's probably applicable to a wider range of individuals than whoever initially requested it. So organizationally, that's something we're always trying to improve and kind of build upon, is how we can scale some of these adaptations to serve other individuals.
or if somebody else sees a better use or construction method for what we've created, nothing we make here is proprietary.
Yeah.
Please take it and make it better.
Yeah. And that's it for the examples. So of course, as we mentioned before, we build here, but more than anything, we want to be a resource. So if you're curious about learning more, or you're going to be in New York for whatever reason and you'd like to stop by, please don't hesitate to reach out. You know, the door's always open if you'd like to take a class or just take a tour. And then of course, digitally or remotely, we can be in contact via phone or email. So our general info email is here. My email's up here as well. Eric and Tamara's emails are just their first names at adaptivedesign.org as well. And then of course you can follow us on our various social media pages. So without any questions, since we're virtual, we're going to move into the hands-on activity here.
Edging.
So we're going to stop sharing this for a bit, and we're going to go back to the cues that we were showing you before. So we have the gym one, we've got drink here. So you can see each one is just the same size cue overall, and then it has a different object embedded into it. And as I was mentioning, we have the standard set of 25. Every set comes with 2 blanks to encourage folks to create their own cues. So it's really as simple as tracing out the object. So in this case, this is for the Twinkle Twinkle Little Star song, and it has a star cut out, and we have a 3D printed star that fits in here. But if, for example, you wanted to embed something else, you could just take that object, trace the profile, and then remove a layer or 2 of cardboard, glue it in place, and you're good to go. So that's quite literally how we do it here. We use a CNC machine to expedite the process, but they can be made by hand fairly easily. And then the kind of crucial part to make these go from just cardboard to a more substantial, durable communication aid is edging them. So the edging process is kind of covering all those corrugated seams and layers and just prepping it for paint and polyurethane that'll really reinforce the material. So these, of course, have already been finished, and you can see how much cleaner that finished edge looks. And all of that is reliant on how well done the edging process is. So we use standard masking tape on these because it's very thin. On a lot of the adaptations, we'll use like a brown craft paper. Recycled shopping bags are really one of the most common things we use. And then we use like a white school glue to sort of do a paper mache process and apply the paper around it. But for the cues, you want it to be a really thin layer, so the masking tape is great for that.
As a general rule, if you're making anything out of cardboard, it's going to be that corrugated edge where it's meeting the flat edge of the cardboard that's going to be most susceptible to damage. So that is going to be the only place that we really focus on edging.
Yeah, so you don't have to cover any of the flats. You'll see even on these cards, we leave the center part open. But yeah, you really do want to make sure that those edges are reinforced. Once the paint gets applied to this, it hardens and it creates almost like a shell. So it's a lot more resistant to crushing and bending. So really the process is fairly simple. A couple things to keep in mind is that you want to make sure that your tape edges never start or finish on a corner. So this is relevant to cues, but also anything that you're edging. So if you start building adaptations out of cardboard, the same rules kind of apply there. So really all we mean by that is you don't want the end of your tape. I'll hold this up close enough, hopefully, that you can see. So you have the end of the tape there. So it's always on a flat portion, never the corner. If it's on a corner, it's just a little bit easier for it to start to peel up, especially once you start painting it. It's something that the brush can catch as you're going over it. So keep that in mind. On the cues, we do 2 pieces of tape. So you have one that starts on this long side and then folds up these 2 corners here, and then the same thing on the other side. So you have another strip that covers this long side, comes down these 2 sides. So really all you have to do to work on it, do you want to do?
I'll do one, you can do one.
Sounds good. So half the time, one of the most annoying steps is getting the tape to start correctly.
You're gonna want to leave yourself what's called a courtesy tab.
Yes. So
nobody ever does.
Yeah, I will do it if I'm going to be using it, but all Eric means is you can fold over the top like that.
And it is courteous to the next person.
So if you press this down, it just keeps it easy to grab. So
yeah.
We don't really do it that much, but if you want to be nice to your coworkers or whoever you're working with, you can do that. So you're going to take a piece of tape. We don't usually cut all the strips of tape, especially when we're doing it with the brown paper. We tend to rely more on a torn edge. So it's called a deckled edge. So you get this kind of irregular edge. It works better when you're trying to glue it down. A clean hard edge will lift up a little bit more easily. So that kind of ragged edge sticks better with glue. For the tape, not as crucial, but again, something to just keep in mind. So you want to kind of estimate the length of the piece so that it covers, again, this side here, plus about half of each of these sides. So you mind holding that up? Yeah, so typically what we'll do is we'll bring the piece of tape up and over. This is probably way long, but you kind of just estimate where you need it to be. And then you're going to tear a strip to the right length, just kind of double check. And that looks about right. So from here, what we'll do is we'll place the piece of tape with the adhesive side facing up on a table. And if you have a nice, clean, flat, smooth surface, that's ideal. And then you want to take your card and try to center this edge in the middle of the piece of tape. So I'll show you what that looks like. So we're just pressing it down. So it's right in the middle of that tape, just like that. So it's centered left to right. And then you can see I have roughly equal amounts of tape left over on the ends to go around the corner. And then from there, we're going to fold it up. Actually, going to do the whole side. That's cool. All right. And all I'm doing is folding this around, keeping it in the middle. It'll look something like that. These pieces are actually a little bit long. It kind of covers the whole side, but really you want to just be at least halfway down on these shorter sides. So as long as you've covered about that much, you're good. You don't have to worry about it going all the way. From there, what I do is I'll just create a small crease. So you see how this is kind of a rounded corner. I'll just pinch the tape lightly. I'm not trying to stick it to itself, but I'm just trying to create a harder edge. So you can see on this side, it's a little bit more defined. On this side, it's still a little bit rounded out. So we're gonna do the same thing on that corner. We're gonna do the same thing on all of these. This way, when you're cutting your corners, you just have a nice hard line to follow. So you'll get something that looks like that. Exactly. And then this is the only part really where you're gonna take scissors. So you're gonna take your pair of scissors and you're gonna cut the tape from the edge all the way up to the cardboard, right along those little creases that you just made. So you're gonna put the edge right on there, cut all four corners, or however many you're doing at once, but in this case, we've got 4. Just like that. There you go.
There you go.
And then from here, you're gonna fold down each of these flaps. So the key is to keep it nice and tight against the corner. So if you were to just kind of push this down like that, it's gonna just fold and you're gonna get that space right in there. So you don't wanna have any space. You wanna make sure it's really pressed down nice and tight. So you're gonna take your finger, you're gonna run it right along that corner, press it down nice and snug, and then keep working your way down just until it's flush.
Like so.
And you'll see if you do it well, you shouldn't have any bubbles, any creases. You want to have it totally flat and smooth in an ideal scenario.
Sometimes you can take it and kind of rub it on the tabletop surface to really
Yes.
flatten it out.
Yeah, exactly. That's why you want to have a nice, clean, flat work surface if possible. And then what I'm going to do is do the same thing to the other short side. I'm going to leave these longer tabs for now. So I'm going to do the same on this side here, creasing against the corner, really pressing it down. You want to make sure that you run your finger across the entire piece of tape. Even if it looks like it's stuck down, just make sure you apply pressure to all of it so that it doesn't lift up later. What happens is when you apply glue, or not glue in this case, but when you apply paint, the moisture in the paint can make the tape lift up if it's not properly adhered.
Yep. And if it gets underneath the adhesive, then the adhesive is no good.
So you should have something that looks like that at this point. So you're going to have your flats or your shorter sides nice and flat, nice and smooth. You've got these little tabs sticking up. Now, you could technically just fold these down, but what happens then is if you have any overlap, you've got, again, a hard edge right on the corner, which you don't want. So what we're going to do is kind of miter these corners. So all that means is we're going to cut this at an angle. So you'll see how Eric will do it here. You're just cutting right across. You want to go right up to that corner as close as possible without cutting the corner off. And you're going to do that to all four and then
like that.
fold it down.
Again, you really want to run your finger along that edge to crease it before you go down. I kind of like to start in the middle. If you start at one end, this can tend to kind of ride up a little bit. You'll get a crease. So if you start in the middle and kind of work your way out to both edges, you get a nice flat surface. You should have something that looks kind of like that.
Yeah. So you can see there, the corner has a nice diagonal line where the edge of the tape is, and that's really what you're going for. You want to have plenty of space between the seam and the edge of the card, and that'll just make it less susceptible to lifting.
A recall and it becomes like a little chart.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. The paint doesn't make anything better. So any imperfections you have at this stage should be worked out before you paint.
Right.
So that's why it's crucial for this to be like a really well done step. So we actually have a staff member named Charles, who's kind of our resident edging pro with cards, and he's got it down to a science. So you can see how nice and clean all his corners are here. So even the mitering of the corner, you can see how it lines up here. On mine, I've got a slight gap, but if you're really precise with your corners, you can see how nicely they'll line up. So that's kind of your ideal result.
Yep.
And then again, any seams that are not the mitered corners are towards the middle of the length on the card, not towards the ends.
Something that can be a nice little last finishing step of edging. You'll notice on your corners, sometimes you get these little dog ears that hang out. It's just the tape kind of bunching up right in the corner. So you just want to take your pair of scissors and just go in there and snip off any little bits that are sticking out at the corner. And then as you paint, that is going to be covered up with paint and then eventually polyurethane.
But you do, yeah, you want to be careful not to go down too far though, because you want to make sure that any slight gap that forms by cutting it isn't too big for the paint to cover up.
Yeah.
So you want it to be just a minimal amount that you're trimming off.
So something kind of like that.
Yeah.
You can see that at all.
Yeah. And that's really it. So you'll do the same thing on the other side. Again, make sure it's all flat. Another thing to keep in mind is to make sure that this is all pressed down. So once you apply it on the table, just give it a run over with your thumb just to make sure it's totally flat and smooth, and you should be good to go. Advantage with the tape is you don't have to wait for the glue to dry before you paint it. So from this, you can go directly to priming, and you'll do a nice light coat. Really with anything we do with cardboard, whether it's edged with paper or tape, you want to do light coats of the primer. Anything too oversaturated is just going to warp the cardboard, and it's going to create some problems down the line. So light coats, let it dry, do another coat if you have to, but just take your time with it and it'll come out nice and clean.
Yep.
And that's really it.
Yeah, and then that's so cool. In New York City, or you're sitting on your permanent home and you're interested in a volunteer opportunity or an internship opportunity or like a professional development learning opportunity, we offer all of those programs here, and we know that we can't meet the needs of everyone in New York City with a disability. So we really, the more the merrier in terms of how many people we can teach to create in the ways that we do to support their community. So thank you guys so much for allowing us to visit with you remotely. And if you do have any questions after you review our workshop, please feel free to be in touch with us either at our info@adaptivedesign.org email, or Adam, Eric, or myself, just our first names at adaptivedesign.org.
Yep.
Thanks for having us.
We hope to hear from you.